Hello and welcome to Madam Speaker by Hilmer's Network, the podcast taking a deep dive with the female candidates ahead of the next federal election. I'm Charlotte Mortlock and I am joined today by Amelia Hamer, the Liberal candidate for the seat of Kooyong. Amelia, it is wonderful to have you in the studio today.
Charlotte, it is lovely to be here.
Well, I'm going to actually, usually I do a few rapid fire questions at the end, but this time we're going to reverse it. I'm going to do them straight off the bat. You ready for a play?
Okay, hit me.
Have you ever cut a fringe after a breakup?
So I haven't. I've always been very careful not to touch my hair. I did have a moment when I finished university, though, that I or in my last term of university, I thought I might dye the bottom of my hair pink. But I did a very temporary dye, so.
Just a few washes.
A few washes, yeah.
Tell me about your first job.
My first job was at Priceline on Glenferrie Road, which is actually in the electorate of Kooyong. And I loved it. I was, going in there and people come in and you'd sort of show them which makeup they could buy and all this sort of thing. I was about 15. It was a great job.
Fun. That sounds good. If you got to be a paid brand ambassador for any product, but it had to be something that you genuinely loved, what would it be?
Robot vacuums. Great call.
Yeah. That is a good one.
Yeah. I'm obsessed with robot vacuums. I have a robot vacuum and a mop. There's an advantage to two and you want them separate.
Okay.
But we can go into this further at a later date.
Okay, clever. That's good though. You've got your at home sorted. What is a daily ritual that you can't go without?
Coffee.
How many a day?
Not more than 6.
Not more than 6?
Yeah. It's one of those things where when you're kind of there and you've got a sort of raging headache and you don't know whether you've had like you don't know what planet you're on and you think maybe it's because you haven't had enough coffee. And the answer is always that you've had too much coffee. So
what would be a low end of the scale?
Oh, 1 or 2.
One or two. Yeah. So you do have days where it's less.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the most mind-numbing TV show that you like?
I can't do mind-numbing TV. I would much rather scroll on my phone.
Yes.
If I'm watching TV, it's a drama or it's something that really engages you.
So no like Real Housewives.
No, I've never been a Real Housewives kind of girl.
Never done reality.
I used to have a housemate who used to watch a lot of Love Island.
Yeah.
So I used to watch a bit with her, but
never got into it.
Never got into it myself.
And you mentioned before, your first job. Mm. Do you think that has given you a good insight into kind of Kooyong and the electorate?
Well, I grew up in the area, right? So I know it sort of inside out. I know the people there. It means a lot to me, and it's I kind of understand how people in Kooyong feel about things, and and I'm keen to keep listening to them and keep representing them.
And how's the campaign been going?
Really good. I've had a great response from people. I go around, I stand on train stations, I do listing posts out the front of supermarkets, I knock on people's doors, and it's just really, really nice. We have, you have great conversations, and particularly with people who wouldn't otherwise engage in politics. And I think those are the most important conversations. There's so many people out there in the community who they don't write to their MP, they don't sort of, comment on Facebook, they'll often say to you, I'm not into politics, I don't know anything about politics. And then you discover very quickly that that's not true at all. They just think that they don't.
Yeah.
And it's that moment where when they're sitting there and they've been shouting at the TV or, whatever, now suddenly they've got an opportunity because I've knocked on their door to engage with the political system and to actually make their voice heard. And I think that's a really special opportunity and something that I love, and that's why I love knocking on people's doors and chatting to people, because you give a voice to people who otherwise don't realise they have that opportunity.
And they're raising anything that's surprising.
Cost of living is obviously number one issue that comes up, and I think also delivery of local projects in the area. There's a lot of things where people have gone, well, we've got this local issue. No one's listened to us for, X number of years. We haven't got it done. And, now we've got to try and deliver those things for people. Yeah.
So campaigning, it's like a lot of time on your feet. There's a lot of door knocking, a lot of standing at train stations, bus stations, whatnot. But you've got a good companion.
Yes, I do. And she has a very cute little blue jacket now.
We should mention it's a dog.
Yeah, it's a dog. It's a dog.
What's her name?
Juno.
What?
She's a Cocker
Breed.
Spaniel. She's very, very attention. She loves attention.
Yeah.
She's very gentle, which is good. And she's very nonplussed about anything anyone does to her. So your little kids can come up and pull her ears, or she just sort of sits there. And
wouldn't it be great to make a headline with like, if your dog attacked, like someone bit them on the ankle or something?
Yeah, I think that would be pretty bad.
How old is she?
She's 2 years, so she's
cute.
She's still a puppy, which means that she's learning lots of bad habits from all the attention she's getting on the campaign trail.
Yeah, good on her. So kind of rewinding back, because you've been, an endorsed candidate of the Liberal Party for a while now, but rewinding a little bit to life before the pre-selection, what did it look like?
I was working at a tech company in Melbourne. I was running a commercial team. It was a great company, really fast moving, really interesting. And then, I think I just got to a point where I was a bit honestly frustrated with politics. And I think, like a lot of women, like let's be honest here, right? I was sitting there and, I've always had someone who's considered myself having kind of liberal values. I don't believe that the government is the solution to every problem. And I was frustrated at the fact that there were no people who looked like me in the Liberal Party, or really in politics in general. I mean, the number of young women that we have, or younger women, I don't actually in the scope of history of politics, I'm actually not that young. I'm in my 30s, but we don't have a lot of women in their 30s. We don't have a lot of people in their 30s and 40s in politics, and I think you really see that in the outcome of policymaking. And it's I put my hand up because I was sick of just kind of sitting on the sidelines and going, I'm frustrated, and actually I thought, maybe I should go and do something.
Yeah.
And more than that, go into a major party and do something.
Yeah.
Because I think, and there's a lot of talk about independent politics and that sort of thing. But in the end, if you want to make a difference, you have to, you've got to get involved in one of the major parties of government and actually shape that party and help be the future of that party with a whole lot of other great younger people and young women that we've got running at the next election.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, where I kind of went, right, I got to do something.
Yeah, it does actually feel good, this election. I mean, through this podcast, we've had a lot of younger women through here, and it's actually awesome to see the next generation of politics.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, like let's think about the problem that we have in Australia from a kind of societal point of view at the moment, which is you've got this group of people in the middle, which is basically in many cases your young families. And these are people I speak to every day, and they're getting squeezed from every direction. So they're paying more money on their mortgage than they've ever paid before. They're paying more income tax than they've paid since the introduction of the GST. So income tax was 40% of the tax base. It's now 50% of the tax base. It's trending towards 60%. So they're paying more and more tax. They're having to put more and more away in their super to save for their retirement. They're paying, all their costs are going up, childcare, groceries, everything. And you look at, you go, well, why is it the case that we're putting so much pressure on the people who we actually want to go out and work? We want them to be productive. We want them to have children and raise children. And yet we're making them shoulder this enormous burden.
Yeah, there was a really great podcast recently by The Squiz that interviewed Chris Ullman, and he was speaking about that, how like the only way societies thrive is when policies really work for the people who are working, like the most productive people in society, or otherwise it kind of falls apart. And it does really feel like at the moment the people who are providing the biggest input to our workforce are suffering kind of the most.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think about people sitting there and going, well, how am I going to live a life that was, or even provide a life for my children that was equal to the life that I had? And I think there's a real existential fear. And we look at the Gen Z and those kind of, I'm told by my brother I'm supposed to say Gen Z.
Because it sounds very American.
It does, but apparently you sound like a boomer if you say Gen Z.
Okay.
But I'm going to say Gen Z.
Yeah, no, I hear it. I'm going to still go my way.
And input noted. But, you know, and then they're looking at the situation of the generation above and they're going, that looks like hell.
Yes.
And
why they look so unappealing.
Yeah.
Even like I look at so many young mothers who young mothers and fathers.
Yeah.
Like you've got two people working so hard around the clock. They're having multiple kids and they're, you know, putting them into daycare so early in the morning, picking them up so late at night. They miss their kids. They want to spend more time with them, but then childcare is so expensive. We've got people telling us, have more children, have more children. It's like, well, guys, it doesn't look that appealing. Like
Exactly.
it really doesn't
Exactly.
look like that sounds like a nice lifestyle.
Yeah.
And we see so many women kind of in their 30s and 40s getting autoimmune diseases and they're just like spread so thin. So I just hate it when people are like, women have more babies and get back to the workforce as fast as possible. I'm like, sorry, has anyone asked the women how they feel and why they might be wanting to have less children and why, you know, do they even want to go back to work? I don't know. I just feel like we speak about women like dairy cows and obviously we want to get everyone into the workforce, but sometimes it just feels like they want us to have babies and 6 weeks later return to work.
Yes. Exactly. And you have all these like weird conversations about housing that are going on, sort of things like, oh, well, we're all just going to have to learn to live in apartments. And you go, I don't want to raise a family in an apartment. I think most Australians actually don't. And I don't think the discussion should be, oh, you just have to.
No.
I live in a 1-bed apartment. I did a TikTok the other day where I was like, well, it was 5 reasons why Australians aren't having kids.
Yeah.
And I turn around and one reason I'm looking around my flat and going, well, I don't actually know where the kids would
where
go.
Would this child be?
In that corner where the dog bed is?
Yeah.
Like it's just
it also
just
feels
doesn't work.
weird that we live in Australia, which is such a huge country. Like I really feel like there are other solutions that we're not looking into.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to bring up a controversial topic, but I personally think the fast rail should be back on.
I love fast rail. I am such a junkie for
Because
fast
then
rail.
we could just build up all of these cities in between the major cities and people could live out of Sydney but get here super easily, commute a couple of days a week.
It's an absolute no-brainer. If you think about Melbourne, we've got all these historic cities around Melbourne, places like Bendigo, places like Ballarat. If you could get from Bendigo to the CBD in about an hour, right, in a way that was just reliable.
Yes. And you could work on the train too.
100%.
Trains are great.
And it doesn't have to be the Shinkansen.
No.
It can just be something that is reasonably fast, very reliable, gets you from A to B. You can live in Bendigo in your detached house with the hills hoist out the back.
Yep, and it's not as expensive.
Veranda out the front.
Yeah.
You know.
Sing it, girlfriend. So I know that another thing that so I find it funny because often when you're spoken about in the media, I kind of get frustrated because sometimes you're spoken about being so young that you're almost like a little like Furby. And I'm like, she's not that young. But then comparatively to probably the average age in Parliament, you are young. Yeah. And so you do kind of hit that cohort of young representation. And I know kind of you had a few policy ideas on that. Yeah. Was one of them on HECS?
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I kind of think about quite a lot. I'll just address one thing on that point about young people as well, because I think it's really important, which is I think if we think about politicians and the stage that we're at in terms of Parliament, especially on the Liberal side of politics, historically I'm not young. So Peter Costello was my age when he went into federal Parliament. Kelly O'Dwyer was 3 or 4 years younger than me. Andrew Peacock, who was the member for Kooyong ages ago, he was 26. So there's a long history of people.
Why do you think that? Do you feel that you're getting do you feel like people are referring to you as like very young?
So I think they are, and I think part of the issue, there's a couple of issues here. I think generally a lot of people are staying at university longer and entering the workforce later.
And living at home longer. Which probably means that people are not in a position where they run for federal parliament until a bit later. I think there's also something going on around the fact that
when people, especially women, traditionally would run for parliament, also tends to coincide with when women might want to have children.
Mm.
And we saw that when I was working in venture capital, that was something we saw a lot. So the best founders in venture capital are in their early 30s. So they've had enough experience in the workforce to, they've gone out, they've understood the problems in an industry, and then they're frustrated and they're like, I'm going to go and solve this problem.
Yeah.
But they're still young enough that they're happy to break things and they're not too,
and you're not too jaded or stuck in your ways. You're
correct.
still kind of like energetic.
Exactly. The problem is 33 as a woman, 34, 35, it's exactly the age where you've got young kids, you're thinking I want to have kids. If I want to have kids, I've got to do it now, and it just times exactly wrongly.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, they say, oh, well, why don't you wait? What about when you're 40? And I think part of the issue there is 40 is actually the most challenging period for a female parliamentarian, because that is bang in the middle of looking after kids as well. So very hard for people to, kind of
pick a time.
Pick a time, right?
Yeah.
So we've got to be sort of open-minded and go, stop telling people they're too young, because historically we're not, right? But secondly, be open-minded to the fact that with the way that our world is kind of in flux in terms of, we're trying to get women in, we're trying to, do all these things. We've got to be more open-minded to people who don't look like the conventional parliamentarian.
And to be like, I always, you've heard this as well in politics. It's like there is never a perfect time to run.
Yeah.
So it's just like you just have to make it work.
Exactly.
Because sometimes like politics half the time is like waiting for the timing of like a seat that you live in becoming available or, something. And so a lot of it you don't actually get to be like, I've woken up this morning and decided that I'll run.
Exactly. So, and it's when you've got the impetus and the in my case, the frustration and the saying, well, now's the time that we've got to change things. That doesn't really have anything to do with where I am at my stage of life. I'm lucky that, because I only spent 3 years at uni. I went and did a master's a bit later on, but I, went straight into the workforce. So, I had a decade-long career. 15 years of renting and, living out of home. Yeah. So I've sort of had that life experience as well. Yeah. So at the moment, one of the things I do is I lecture at Swinburne, which is the local university in Kooyong. And it was actually put forward by one of my students. And I thought it was a really cool idea. Mm-hmm. And his point was that at the moment, the way HECS is structured is the universities don't care about your labour market outcomes. Mm-hmm. They don't care if you get a job or not. And they're not incentivized to help you get a job. Mm. So what he said is, well, why don't we structure it the other way around? So instead of saying you come out of university with a debt that you pay off as a percentage of your salary, let's flip it. And let's say you come out of university, the university is entitled for, let's say, 10 years to a percentage of your income, which varies based on how much you earn, which means that if you come out of university, you get a really well-paid job, you do really well, the university makes lots of money out of you for 10 years. If you don't get a job, the university doesn't make money out of you. So change the incentive. Make universities be focused on getting good labour market outcomes for people.
And then, I think a problem is that potentially too many people are doing university degrees for certain industries.
Yeah.
So it would probably.
Well, you'd get rid of some of these perverse incentives that you have at the moment. Like what we see is that in some courses, universities are training more people than jobs exist in the labour market. So if you take paramedicine as an example, or you take so a lot of people want to be paramedics, but there's never quite enough jobs in the paramedic field every year. And you see that in physio is apparently another one where there's often oversupply into the labour market. So you'd force universities to change
tailor their intake
to the number of jobs. And I think what's really important on this is that, there's a lot of people sort of suggested, hey, there's all these things that, we need to change HECS indexation. And look, I commend the government. Yeah. And to be clear, it was the government who came out and the Universities Accord, Universities Accord came out and suggested it, and the government made the change. Commend the government on making that change, but it doesn't even begin to address the fundamental problem that we have in the imbalance between the amount that people are paying to go to university, the quality of the education that they're receiving, and then the jobs that they're able to get post-university. So we are sending people to university for longer and longer to accrue more and more debt, to have, frankly, a worse and worse quality education. And to what end? So rather than just saying, oh, let's fiddle around the edges with the HECS system, we need to think about how do we fix this holistically?
Yeah, and not to be, massively pessimistic, but I think that, like, there's so many policies that, like, we tinker at the edges and they actually just need to be overhauled and start again.
Exactly.
And I know that takes a lot of effort, but there are, like, a lot of things that it's like, no, this might have served us 50 years ago, but So,
but again, that's the reason why we need people in Parliament who can be there with a 20-year view.
Yes.
Because people are going, oh, that'll take 20 years. You go, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm ready for it.
Like, talk to me in 20 years when I've been
Yeah, and, one of the things I really don't like is when people who are, considerably older than you, when you come to an idea or a problem with lots of energy and they kind of are like, oh, no, that won't work. It's like, why would you because they're and I get it, because they're probably frustrated and they feel like they've tried every avenue. Yeah. But it's like, don't kind of diminish someone's optimism and boldness and ambition for that,
And you look at the people who've been boldest in Parliament, and again, so this is not political because he was a Labor treasurer, but Paul Keating, for instance, all the reform that they brought in the 80s was incredibly bold. He was someone who went into Parliament in his early 20s. So I think sometimes just bringing that kind of that desire to actually go, right, we're going to wrestle with new ideas and we're going to actually make change is really important.
The counter to that is that I do think that society is super over career politicians. So whilst you might be, keen to stick your teeth in and do 20 years in Parliament, I do think it's important that we note that you've actually had a pretty diverse professional background. We don't need year by year, but give me kind of like the 3 highlights on your CV of kind of where you've lived, and I know you've lived overseas and worked for some big companies. Yeah,
so I out of school basically went overseas, studied at Oxford. I was very, very fortunate to be and lucky to be able to do that. I then got a job in investment bank in London. So I was an equities analyst, which is kind of, I don't know if you've seen it's in The Big Short, or one of these, there's a scene in this, it's a finance movie, and there's a scene in it.
I can't say it's my favourite pastime.
You're saying you don't watch finance movies. There's a scene in it where basically the guy kind of has a stack of Jenga.
Yeah.
And he does this thing where he explains what's going to happen when the economy crashes, the housing market crashes, and he starts pulling out Jenga blocks. That was basically my job, which was to be the guy or the girl, in my case, the woman, who went around to investors and gave them a view about what was going to happen to particular companies, or
this country, their economy is doing this, the unemployment rate, blah, 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 taking in all the factors.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and in my case, it was more about individual companies and saying, well, this company's going to perform well, another company is going to perform badly. But I was an analyst, so an equities analyst, and that was my job to kind of.
Who was that for?
So that was for Bank of America Merrill Lynch.
Yep.
And then I went and did a very similar job in tech, but actually on the investment side. So we were making the investment decisions based on, views about various things.
And where were you based for that job?
London as well. Okay. So I spent 5 years in London working there, which was, amazing. The financial sector there is just unbelievable. And a lot of it was really government driven. I was there when fintech really took off globally, and London was the epicenter of that. And that was really because of reforms that the Cameron government put in.
Yeah.
So it was a really good example of where you see government kind of working to nurture and create an industry.
Yeah.
And a lot of the banking competition and stuff you see in the UK is something that we could, I think, really learn from.
Is there any other kind of policy areas that you think need a lot of attention if you were to be lucky enough to win the seat of Kooyong?
I mean, I think most economic policy areas at the moment we really need to seriously wrestle with, because if we don't, I'm genuinely worried in the sense that our debt to GDP ratio it's about 45% at the moment. That's higher than it's been, I mean, at least since 1970. And there's a lot of, in Australia we've got a lot of green space. People have larger places. Quality of life is really good. We have a state that looks after people. We're able to provide aged care. We're able to provide, look after disabled people. We're able to provide a social safety net for people. I genuinely worry that we will not be able to provide that for future generations. And we need to think about how do we reform our economy. We have a problem where 50% of our exports are coal, gas and iron ore. If those come off over the next, call it 30 years, reduce significantly, we need to find other ways to generate growth.
Yeah. And
that's going to be a big challenge.
Yeah, a bit of a random tangent here. But I was listening to a podcast the other day that was talking about, and this might be oversimplifying it, but how Taiwan basically created their own industry of like the blue chips.
Yep.
And it's like that was so smart and so innovative of them. It's almost like Australia needs to be like, right, what are we going to have in the world that can be our, greatest export?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think part of that actually just comes from making it easier to do business, and then people will find the things that we can do really well.
Yeah,
and the problem is at the moment it's pretty hard to start a business. As we were talking about, it's hard to, if you want to kind of get ahead, we put a lot of blocks in your road to kind of do that. So I do think there's a lot of, reform we need to look at from a taxation perspective.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So I want to hard launch now into Jiu-Jitsu.
Okay.
So I don't even really know how to put the language around it. You do Jiu-Jitsu.
I do it. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I do.
Okay.
I do it. Yeah.
How did you end up doing Jiu-Jitsu?
So it was one of these really bizarre things that during COVID of all things, I was at a gym. I was doing some boxing and some kickboxing, and they also had jiu-jitsu.
Did you always do kickboxing?
No, I'd done a little bit here and there. I'd done some taekwondo, that sort of thing.
When did you do taekwondo?
I did taekwondo when I was in the UK. So I've sort of always been a little bit martial arts.
So tell me how you got into taekwondo then, like where the martial arts interest started.
I think I just went down and tried a class one day when I was at uni actually, and then sort of did a little bit there, and then got involved in a club in London. Started doing that.
Were you good at it?
And then not particularly good, but
just a fun hobby.
Just a fun hobby, I think so. And then so I was doing a bit of kickboxing, and weirdly during COVID, you couldn't sort of gather in groups more than sort of, and this is the whole craziness of a lot of these rules, but you couldn't gather in groups of more than however many, but you could roll around on a mat with someone.
Yeah. So you started doing it through COVID as a fun way to do exercise.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was doing that, and I just sort of started getting into it, and it's just a great community. You meet a lot of people who, you wouldn't otherwise kind of necessarily encounter, I was in professional sort of jobs, that sort of thing. And you go down to Jiu-Jitsu club and you got, some guys who are tradies and, a few coppers, all different kind of people from different walks of life.
Yeah. I'm not religious, but I do think with the demise of religion, we've really struggled to fill the void of that like random eclectic mix of people that gather in a place. And I do think that gyms sometimes operate like that. Like people really get into their gym community. And I think part of the attraction is because of like the inconsistency and the diversity of different lives. I think that's, and people do, like we're in such a stage where people just surround themselves with people that they agree with and people that think the same as them. But I do think that there's a little bit of a magnetic thing that we actually do, hopefully, for the sake of humanity, seek out being in environments where you do genuinely have diversity.
I think you're right. More and more people are basically self-selecting into they're able to design their social interactions. And you see that, you know, people leave the house to go and meet with the people who are their friends.
Yeah.
And then other than that, they're mainly interacting with people online.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people, I mean, Kooyong's a great community because people often stop and have a chat in the shops and that sort of thing. But I think a lot of people, they very much just want to now be in their comfort zone.
Yeah.
And I think it's just really healthy to step outside that. And it reminds me of, you know, the difference between being a teenage girl where you only interacted with people who you wanted to interact with.
Yeah.
And then, you know, when you become an adult and then you have to become much more kind of open and accepting.
And proactive.
And just, hey, okay, this person's a bit different, but that's okay.
Yes.
No problem.
And, I always think that you should, when you look at your friends, you should not agree with them on politics. Like you shouldn't agree with all of them. Like you should vote differently on some things to make sure that you have that diversity of views, because it's just about really making sure that you have kind of the most holistic view of things.
Exactly. And it's so easy to get caught in those kind of echo chambers and not, you know, be aware of the diversity of views that are out there. And, you know, I have a bit of a philosophy on this stuff where, you know, if someone's telling me about, you know, politics that they're involved in and it's totally different politics to mine, I like to make sure I encourage and congratulate them and go like, that's awesome that you're, even though I completely disagree with your side on this issue, I think it's really awesome that you're engaged.
Yeah, one of my neighbours letter drops all the time for the Greens. And I just like that he's proactive, because you get so many people who are super politically engaged but not proactive in politics, like doing things that are actually going to address kind of systemic stuff. And I'm always like, oh, good on you, like, good luck. And I always feel like he's like not quite.
He's not vibing it.
No, because he knows that I'm a liberal and he's a little bit less warm. But I'm still like, woo, go you, go democracy.
I think it's the best approach. You've just got to, like, there's a group of people in Australia who are politically engaged. The more we can expand that group and the less bystanders we can have, the better.
Yeah, I agree. So jiu-jitsu, do you compete?
I have competed. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever done in my life. The worst part about it is when I went, this was at the Pan Pacifics, and I was standing on the side of the mat.
Pan Pacifics?
Yeah, but it sounds better than it is.
I'm sorry, are you an Olympian?
No. It sounds
Pan Pacific
really good.
sounds very good.
Yeah, but they tier it by belts.
Okay.
So there's different levels for different people. I'm unfortunately also in the masters section.
Oh,
so,
are you?
Yeah,
Gosh,
exactly.
that's a bit of a reality check.
Reality check. I'm not an adult anymore. I'm a master.
At what point do you become a master? Over 30?
Over 30.
Gosh, brutal.
But I was standing there on the mat and they're wiping up the blood from the one before.
Oh, gosh.
And you're going, this is really...
Yeah. That seems daunting.
Yeah. But nothing I've ever done was as scary as doing that. I've never felt as out of my comfort zone as I did. You know, you get on a mat and you've got someone else who's trying to hurt you.
Yeah.
And then lovely girl, the other girl.
But that is the objective.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you win in jiu-jitsu?
It's either by points.
Yeah.
So certain positions you get more points.
Yeah.
So getting closer to a submission generally. And then, or you can submit them. So that's choking, breaking their arm, you know, putting their legs or muscles in different positions.
Done much of that, Dal?
No. Well,
I would be so bad at that. I
don't know. I can see you breaking a few arms.
Yeah. Brutal.
Mortlocked?
Yeah.
You get mortlocked? What's a mortlock? That's like a kind of special.
That is
you got
true.
an arm lock, you got a mortlock.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
So how did you go?
Not well.
Okay.
But no one needs to know that.
Yeah, okay. And so have you ever been seriously hurt?
I have not, because I'm pretty good about just kind of tapping. You got to tap when you're going to break something.
Yeah.
Otherwise you get seriously hurt. But it's quite fun where you get to the point where you can, and they call it rolling, which is where you just kind of wrestle with someone not as a competition.
Yeah.
But where you get to a point where you can kind of, it doesn't matter how big the guy is, if they don't know what they're doing, you can make their life very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And you get these big dudes who are like, yeah, it's like this chick and I'm just going to like, you know, completely destroy her. And then you sort of, you know, they can't, you're just sort of lying on top of them and they just can't get you off them. And so it's
tactics and minds and
because it's all about how do you use your weight and your technique, even if you're a smaller person, to defeat a larger opponent.
Yeah,
so it's very
smart.
Yeah, and it's, as a woman, I've also found it's just it's kind of amazing, not just from a self-defense perspective and a physical kind of perspective, but also just being confident about myself and what is and what isn't a physical threat to me.
Yeah.
And just knowing that I can, kind of look after myself physically in that sense. Yeah.
We're going to close out the pod now, but because, you know, Hilma's is trying to support women in politics, I wanted to ask you a final question of who is a woman who has inspired you?
Oh, that's a good question. In Australian politics?
No, it doesn't have to even be in politics, just in life.
Okay. I look, I'm gonna do some Australian politics women because I want to shout out to. Actually, particularly what I do is shout out to women who support other women because I think, you know, often we see that, and sometimes we do and sometimes we don't.
Yeah.
So Jane Hume's been an amazing mentor to me, an amazing support to me. People like Julie Bishop are really, really great. I mean, I really admire her, and she's, again, just been incredibly supportive to me, and I just think that's so important and something I want to make sure I do to other women as well. But that's something that I really admire because I think it's one thing as a woman to kind of make it and then, you know, sort of turn around and say,
pull the ladder up instead of pulling other women up.
Exactly. Pull the ladder up or say, look, it was hard for me, so it's got to be hard for you too.
Yeah. Oh, God. That's my most hated line.
Yeah.
Like the complete – I feel such a sense of responsibility.
Yeah.
Like I'm only in my 30s, but I really feel an incredible responsibility to make life easier for the next generation of women who grow up to have centre-right politics, that it is easier. And it's not good enough to be like, well, it's just as hard for me as it was, as, you know, that's not acceptable.
Exactly.
And I don't think that's leadership.
Exactly. And I think that to me is that ability to be so self-confident in your in your own self, you can actually, it doesn't bother you helping someone else. You don't feel,
and you're not threatened by it.
You don't feel threatened. You just go, I'm confident in myself so I can help someone else. And that's something I really admire.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Amelia, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We wish you all the best of luck in the seat of Kooyong.
Amazing. Thank you, Charlotte.
Authorised by C. Mortlock, Hilma's Network Foundation Limited, Sydney.